And welcome back. 5 former astronauts came to our area recently to say it's time to think big again when it comes to exploring space. The astronauts visited the Cradle of Aviation Museum on Long Island, where one of the lunar modules was built and is on display. Astronaut Mary Cleave was born on Long Island. She was inspired by the historic 1969 moonwalk and the new plan to go to Mars.
I think the future of space exploration is an integration of humans and robotics working together effectively.
Well, it's exploration, finding out what's out there in the rest of the solar system, and the sooner we get on with it, the better.
Now, these astronauts say what's needed is a big boost in space funding and a big vision as well. And here to explain more about where we're headed is about Long Island's major contribution to space exploration and well is Andrew Parton. He is the executive director for the Cradle of Aviation Museum on Long Island. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
So big plans for the upcoming anniversary. First of all, talk about that because we're going to be in 2018 and then we're just 1 year shy of the 50th anniversary. But you got to run up all the way, right?
Well, we're looking at almost a year and a half to a little bit more than a year and a half of events and activities to kind of celebrate the impact that Apollo had on not just Long Island, but the country and the world.
Yeah, I mentioned Long Island because the lunar modules, the first, were built right here on Long Island, and that's a lot of pride in that, first of all. And you have one right there in your museum, and that's quite a significant achievement because there's not too many of these, right? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's certainly the crown jewel of the museum. There were 3 built to go to the moon that did not because the program was cut back in '72 after Apollo 17. So the other 2, one's at the Smithsonian in Washington and the other's at the Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah, I think we've heard of those places.
Yeah.
So you're right in the league with them.
Right, and they were all built in Bethpage.
Well, you know, this brings back such memories right here. I was just a kid, but I do remember the moment in July 1969 when we first stepped on the moon. People all over the country, all over the world actually stopped to marvel at that achievement. It's still amazing to look at that when you see that video inside your museum there.
Yeah, it's one of those things where everybody knew where they were when it happened, and it's one of those few positive events that you can say that about. So it's probably more significant from not just an engineering standpoint, but technology and the impact it had on everybody.
Well, tremendous tension. People would just gather in front of their sets, and it was also amazing to think that we could put this on television, and you could see people in space walking on the moon at the same time that it was happening, and television was proud to be the way that people got to enjoy that.
Well, and it was a time of, Vietnam War was still going on, and we had lots of sad and bad things going on, so this was probably one of the most positive things taking place at that time.
It was very uniting, and even across the world, people were applauding the achievement here. Didn't matter American or whoever, people were just thrilled that we could have made this giant leap for mankind. How do we get back to a moment like that?
Well, I think it's, if you talk to a lot of the Apollo astronauts, they said we need a goal. You know, the problem is right now is that every new administration that comes in Washington changes the goal or moves the goalposts. So we don't have a definitive goal. President Kennedy in '61 said we should get to the moon and back by the end of the decade.
And we did.
And we did. Yeah. And so I think everybody's looking for whether we go back to the moon, we go on to Mars, or we go on to an asteroid.
Well, you know, the shuttle folks, as great as their achievements were, they dealt with that. People in Congress saying, okay, how many times are we going to go to this big empty rock in space there and find nothing? And that kind of led to, you know, a decline in support for it. You get that kind of skepticism sometimes. How do you answer that?
Well, a lot of it is one of the things NASA did poorly was promoting the idea of what we got out of the space program. If you look at from computer technology, cellular technology, even renewable energy.
Your cell phone.
Yeah, a lot of that came out of the space program. But NASA doesn't do a good job telling people that. And so most people think of Tang and Velcro as the biggest achievements we had.
No, you know, and what's remarkable is what they were working with. Even then, your cell phone now has more computing power than what was on any of these modules that went and landed on the moon, right?
Well, we tell kids that come in to see the lunar module that the computer on the LEM was 32K. Which a handheld calculator has more power.
Well, and we see, you know, that kids are savvy to that. Is it just a budget issue then? Because, you know, I think we've got to look at some of our competitors, China, moving ahead very aggressively in space. Should we be concerned about that? And is this just a budget issue?
I think it's a big part of it, and everybody's looking kind of for return on investment. So it's a big, I mean, if you look at the early 60s, it was probably the largest research and development project ever entertained. There were 400,000 people in 48 states working on going to the moon. So it is a big money issue, but it's also a lot of pride that took place, too.
Well, you're trying to shine a spotlight on that to help grow the support for it, because obviously you're proud of what you do and it's part of your heritage, but you think that we should be moving forward. So there's been this talk in the past from the White House, and kind of not sure where it is right now. Where does the mission to Mars stand?
Well, I think the challenge right now is that it seems to be a one-way trip. It's going to take about 8 months to get there. And so the question is, even though there's a number of people who have signed up to say, I want to be on that list to go, and I understand it's a one-way trip, there is technology, from what I've heard, that could shorten that trip. But
why would it be a one-way trip? You mean they wouldn't be able to return because they wouldn't have enough fuel? They can't carry the fuel?
It's more of it is it's 8 months there, and how long are you going to spend there, and then coming back.
So that would be a base, perhaps? Or
probably,
maybe I think I've even read articles that somehow they'd be able to find raw materials on Mars that would enable them to create the fuel they would need to go back to lighten the load for the
There was just something in the paper this week about an engineer who was creating fuel cells based on the theory of what you could mine on the Mars or even on Moon.
Because we've got to look at those things, because right now our technology is limited by, you know, how much we can lift up into space, because enormous weights are involved, especially when you're carrying solid fuel. But there's always the potential for us to develop new propulsion methods as well, right?
Yeah, and it's happening every day. You have private industry like Elon Musk and SpaceX and companies like that that are really pushing the envelope a bit further than even NASA can.
You know, I was surprised at how many of these astronauts come from Long Island.
We have a dozen.
A dozen of them. You're expecting, will we see these astronauts again?
Yeah, the plan is that almost every month we'll have a visiting either astronaut, artist, writer coming into the museum to talk to people, talk to school kids, and then talk to the general public as well.
And the kids were really jazzed that were there that day when they met the astronauts, because they read about them in their school books, but then they met them in person, saw that they're, you know, humans, flesh and blood, you know.
Well, and they're a big part of history, so it's a big thrill for them.
Well, Andrew Parton, Executive Director with the Cradle of Aviation on Long Island, talking about the big anniversary and now on to Mars, right?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, sir. And before we go, why a Long Island family is convinced there really is a Santa?